Welcome to another episode of Surgeons' Lives. I'm your host, John Monson. Our guest today is Jim Fleshman, who is currently the chair of the Department of Surgery at Baylor University Medical Center in Dallas. Jim was born in New Orleans and spent much of his formative years in Northern Ireland before moving with his family to St. Louis. He spent most of his life in St. Louis, going to medical school there, doing his residency at WashU, and apart from a year in Toronto for a colorectal fellowship, then went on faculty in WashU, where he served as division chief. About 10 years ago, he moved to Dallas. Jim is a big baseball fan and currently is on a mission to go to most, if not all, of the Major League Baseball grounds in the country. A stellar career has seen him rise to the presidency of ASCRS, as well as the American Board of Colorectal Surgery. And he's a well-known proponent of surgical research, holding multiple federal grants over the years. In recent years, he's realized that there's perhaps more than one way to skin a cat, and perhaps multiple different ways of managing people in terms of mentors, and has set himself the task of hopefully improving people's careers by guiding them in terms of their path through life. I hope you'll enjoy our conversation today. If you do, don't forget to like and subscribe, and please send me whatever comments you want in terms of the podcast. Enjoy. So, well, Jim, thanks for taking some time out of your afternoon to join us on another episode of Surgeons' Lives, which, as you know, has a separate subtitle called Stuff That Matters, because whilst it would be no doubt an enjoyable experience to go through your extensive CV line by line, and we will, of course, touch on that. It's the main purpose is for me to try and talk to a range of surgeons from Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere, around the countries, different specialties, to show that there's more to the surgeon than just being in the OR or the office. There's a life behind it, and which I think sometimes gets lost in what is becoming an increasingly pressurized healthcare system. So what I've asked, and I would ask you to do, is if you would start us off by giving us a brief history of life and times, starting with the words, "I was born in."
Okay. Well, I was born in New Orleans. Lived there for a year. My parents were in the Baptist Seminary in New Orleans, and then we moved over to Luling, where my dad became a chemical engineer. And then from there to Shreveport, Louisiana for another 5 or 6 years. And then we moved to Northern Ireland. Um, I really grew up in Northern Ireland in Bangor. Went to Bangor Grammar School, learned how to play rugby, fell in love with science, decided to become a doctor at that time, and had to decide in 1972 whether to stay and go to Queen's Belfast or to come back to United States. Ended up moving to St. Louis and went to Washington University in biology, then to medical school at WashU, and then residency at WashU. A year in Toronto as a fellow with Zane and Robin McLeod, and then back to St. Louis as a assistant professor of colorectal surgery with Ira Codner and Bob Fry. And 10 years ago, Linda and I looked at each other as empty nesters sitting in St. Louis, and said, if we ever find a city where both or two of our kids have landed, we would move to that city. Dallas happens to be that place. My son lives in Raleigh. He has 4 of our grandkids, and Cindy lives in Dallas, has 2 of our grandkids, and Angie lives in Dallas and has the seventh grandkid. And
Wow.
that now kind of sets the stage for what I do for fun, which is follow grandkids.
Yeah, yeah, that's quite a selection. I feel humbled having a mere one. Um,
You've got some catching up to do, but it'll be fun.
exactly. So when you moved to St. Louis from the north of Ireland, Northern Ireland, or Northern Ireland as it's called,
Yep.
um, and I'm obviously, because you were brought up in the north of Ireland, you clearly never gave any thought to going to a proper medical school, namely Trinity College in Dublin. That was
No,
up
I wasn't allowed to cross the border.
exactly, exactly. Um, in those days, though, they would have happily taken your foreign student fees, you know.
Oh, sure. Oh, I'm sure they would have.
That was, as you know, Ireland in those days, that was pre-Celtic Tiger.
Yes, right.
Not a wealthy country by any manner of means, with quite a lot of hardship going on. But when you moved to St. Louis because your folks moved back to St. Louis, or did you strike out on your own?
Well, my dad got a job in St. Louis,
Right. Yeah.
working for the railroad company that was there, American Car Foundry,
Ah,
and I got into college, and they eventually moved on to Houston to work in the oil industry down here for National Lead. And my dad and my mom moved around several times from the time that they left St. Louis. And
yeah.
I stayed in St. Louis, got married, and we
The
kind of
rest
made
is
that home for almost 42 years.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And you, you know, Teresa DeBesh is one of my colleagues here. You know, she's a Louisiana girl,
Mhm.
but she suffers near-death experiences if she gets too close to snow. It's just not
Yeah,
something,
it's not good.
you know, she's just not capable of tolerating it at all. But you spent, as you say, nearly 40 years seeing plenty of cold temperatures and snow, which is not bad for a Louisiana boy.
Well, we learned to ski. We went to Colorado quite a bit. The year in Toronto taught my kids how to ice skate and cross country ski. And
Yes.
actually, my youngest daughter learned how to ski in Holiday Hills, just north of Toronto. So we we uh, we had a good time. We enjoyed winter sports, but it wasn't as much of a passion as it is for others.
Yeah, it's I can ski. I'm not a good skier, but I can ski. But having lived in Minnesota for a year and upstate New York for 8 years, I remain unconvinced exactly what the purpose of cross-country skiing is. It seems to me a complete waste of time.
It's all about exercise. That's all it is. It's all about exercise.
I mean,
And
you could do that. You could do that at home, you know.
I did. I used to use Nordic Track for my exercise. So it was,
Exactly.
but it was in a controlled environment.
Exactly. So in your, rapid fire run through your professional career, there must have been role models and mentors in there somewhere. And who were they and why were they?
Well, it's very interesting. I actually got into medicine strictly because of a family friend. Uh, Linda, my wife, knew Colonel Beasley, Charles Beasley, who was a uh, Washington University graduate in 1920, was in the military. He served under Omar Bradley
Huh?
as the head of his forward surgical unit in Italy and Europe. And he came back to be the leader of the Central Division of the VA. Now, Dr. Beasley went to our church in St. Louis, in Kirkwood, and found out that I was interested in medicine and got me a job at the VA, Jefferson Barracks VA, doing research with an endocrine physician, medicine, endocrine, and I spent 3 summers in his lab. I never got a publication out of it, but I learned scientific technique and research technique. And then the next person that influenced my career was Dr. Edward Jones, who was from New Zealand. He was a neuroanatomist at Washington University. He was my honors in biology project supervisor. And I ended up working in his lab as well for 2 years of undergrad and then 2 years in medical school during the summer, and getting several publications on the development of the neonatal rat. And let me just say, it wasn't earth-shattering science or anything like that, but it was fun. And I at one time contemplated neuro as a specialty.
Wow. Okay.
But once I got into medical school and I rotated on surgery, I realized I was destined to be a surgeon. And the guy that really impressed me the most during my, not only during my medical school surgical rotations, but also during my general surgery at WashU, was Ira Codner.
Mm-hmm.
And Ira always joked that you have to be really nice to your medical students because you never know when they might become your boss. And that actually held out to be true in my case. And so, having had Ira guide my career both at the ASCRS, at the Board of Colorectal Surgery, in Washington University in an academic setting, was, it was a godsend. And I can't thank him enough.
It's interesting. Ira was concerned about the medical student ending up as his boss. My colleague for a number of years when I was in Hull, as the chair in Hull, was a man called Peter Lee, who ultimately became president of the ACP. And he was John Gallagher's fellow for 2 years, a man he idolized. Gallagher was not the easiest of men, shall we say. If I was to tell you that John Gallagher was a North of Ireland Orangeman, you would know exactly what I mean by that.
Absolutely. And I met John under Ira's guidance. And,
so Peter, the greatest thrill that Peter had in his career, which he will tell you, is that not that he became John Gallagher's boss, but he became his doctor.
Oh, that's cool.
And it was, nothing sinister or serious, but to him, that was the greatest honor of his career.
I'm sure.
It was kind of interesting. Now I think you said your folks in Louisiana were in the seminary.
Yes, they were at the Baptist Theological Seminary in New Orleans.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you are a man of faith, to use a phrase. The reason I ask that or raise it is that you and I spent a number of years in Ireland around the same time. I obviously was born and brought up there. And, at that time, Ireland was quite a polarizing place to be.
Yes.
And people, were fundamentally killing each other on the altar of faith beliefs. And, people did one of two things in that scenario. They either, took up arms and joined in, or they turned away. And I, chose the latter. I was in Dublin when the IRA bombs went off just outside where we were sitting in 1974. Wow. And so I always, I am not a person of faith. My sister has that covered for me. She's a missionary. So
oh, that's cool. Yeah.
So she sorts that out. But I was just interested in what you saw when you were growing up in the north of Ireland at a time which was, the Troubles were really fully fledged at that point.
They were indeed. I considered, we went to an Irish Baptist church in Bangor. I had some really good friends who lived in Hollywood, just out of Belfast, Ian Campbell and Ross Campbell. And they came to Bangor to go to church. And it was, there were maybe 350 members. Baptists are not a large religious group in Northern Ireland. There were, there was never any disparaging word spoken about the religion of the people from Ireland as opposed to Ulster, which is where Northern Ireland is.
Yeah.
What I learned was that this was not a true religious war. This was a economic war.
Yeah,
This
exactly.
was about oppression, suppression, and lack of funding of the appropriate state programs that could have alleviated much of what was going on.
No, for sure.
Had we just dealt with that, there wouldn't have been near the friction.
No, for sure. And, I was struck by, at the beginning, probably 10 years earlier than that, when the civil rights marches started, one of the slogans that was used was "one man, one vote." And of course, that was at a time when, unless you were a house owner, you did not have a vote.
Right.
And of course, all the property was all owned by the Protestant population, and the Catholic population didn't. And you're thinking to yourself, wait a minute, this is in the United Kingdom, and yet there's this incredible suppression of half the society. It's hardly surprising that people are on the streets asking for a life,
Yes.
And as you say, it was on the, it rode on the coattails of religious differences, but it wasn't really.
No, I'm a history buff. I've read a lot about both Northern Ireland and Ireland itself, and the history as far back as you can go, even to the Saxons and the Irish being part of the Viking legend back and forth. It was all based on who got what and who could hold on to what. And I don't know that that should ever be related to religion, because the origins were not truly about.
No, it's wherever you go in the world, people latch on to different, differences, or
Yes.
it's just an easy tag. So there you are, starting out fresh-faced and enthusiastic in Wash U. What was your can you recall what your ambitions were at that time? What did you see yourself being 20 years later?
So it's very interesting because I since I am a person of faith, and I do believe that God has guided my career. I got into general surgery thinking I was going to be a small town general surgeon. Excuse me. In Sullivan, Missouri, and Sullivan, Missouri is 45 minutes outside of St. Louis. My wife grew up in St. Clair, Missouri, which is 35 minutes out of St. Louis, and I had met a surgeon there who wrote a book called Working Without a Net. And it was about his life as a general surgeon in a small town, 24/7, having to get someone to cover for him for 2 weeks vacation, knowing the entire population of Sullivan, and being just part of the community. And I thought that would be really cool. And I went to meet him. My father-in-law and brother-in-law were developers, and they actually had bought the hospital in the town, and they were remodeling it. And they thought, well, this is great because Jim can be the chief of surgery at Sullivan Hospital. And during the summers, I was working as a construction supervisor, and realized that maybe the small town life was not going to be as good as I thought it was. And my wife told me it definitely wasn't going to be as good as I thought it was. So Linda and I decided that we needed to rethink that plan. And the influence of the people in my department of surgery in St. Louis was profound, because Gordon Philpott, who was our chief of surgery, he was at Washington University, had spent time at the NIH. He had a lab looking at CEA. So even though he's a surgical oncologist, he kind of had something that connected him to colorectal. And at one point, they needed someone to go into the lab because they had a log jam above. And they said, well, Fleshman's done research, we'll put him in the lab. And that changed my life. I found out that the research background I had could immediately be translated into a career in academic surgery.
Mm.
And it gave me, I got the Monheimer Research Fellowship, paid my salary for 2 years. I learned scientific method. It gave me insight into what it took to get an R01. After I graduated, and when Philpott retired 5 years later, I inherited his R01 and then used his lab going forward for other things to look at laparoscopy and the impact of pneumoperitoneum and whatever.
The methodology is a core skill.
Yes.
And
the knowing what a control is, knowing what the idea, and it's basic science translates right into clinical science. You can't deny that. And having a curious mind is part of what comes out of that experience.
And at that time, and still today, of course, WashU is an academic powerhouse across the board, with at various times #1 in NIH funding, et cetera, but was also part of at that time a Midwestern cartel almost of the colorectal centers, with Mayo and Cleveland. You'll forgive me for saying, because Ira used to complain about this, dominating the landscape, with Ira in the background saying, "What about us? Wait about what?" Ira always had a chip on his shoulder about the fact that the James IV Fellows never visited WashU.
Etc.
And in those days, the UK, of course, was dominated by St. Mark's, and 1 or 2 other specific places. But now, just like climbing Mount Everest, colorectal surgery is done far and wide by many people in many centers. How have you observed that over the last couple of decades?
So, the colorectal surgery was started by Joe Matthews after a career in academic surgery in Kentucky, and so we came from an academic background, and then we became a clinical non-academic specialty. The clinics built themselves around colorectal surgery: Cleveland, Mayo, Leahy. You can think of others, the clinic in Ohio and the Ochsner Clinic in New Orleans. And so, as that goes, the clinicians that were there were very strong, and they were very dedicated to getting their outcomes and following their results and talking about things. And because the ASCRS was some of the first large national meetings to kick in, even as big as the American College of Surgeons in some aspects, they held a place of high regard around the country already. But what was missing was the join of colorectal surgery to an academic mission. And if you look at it now, all of the major clinics that had colorectal surgery have become affiliated with medical schools. Washington University, IRA, watched Haran Abkarian become the first professor of colorectal surgery in the country at University of Illinois.
Yeah.
But it really still didn't have that academic value that we saw in surgical oncology and hepatobiliary and trauma, whatever. And IRA said, wait, so let's start an academic colorectal surgery unit. And he went to Sam Wells, and after some discussion and some back and forth, Sam bought into it. Not that Sam liked colorectal surgeons, but he saw the value in having it as part of an academic group. So IRA started, really, in my mind, the first full-time academic program in colorectal surgery, with everyone being a full-time academic employee owned by the medical school.
Yeah, and
and that went forward.
Well, you'll remember also that in Haran Abkarian's case, it wasn't the medical school that bought into it. I mean, his chair was the Turi Josephson chair.
Yes.
Funded by Autosuture, as it was then. I mean,
Leon.
Who cares who funds it? But the point is, it was industry who provided the impetus to do it.
Yeah, Leon Hirsch saw what the benefit was, and I think that was something that a lot of people hadn't in the past.
Yeah, exactly.
And so Abkarian has influenced us all. He was really the first chair of a department of surgery who came from a colorectal surgery background. And now you look around the country and you see they're everywhere.
And I think he certainly remains far above any other colorectal surgeon for the store of jokes he has.
For sure.
I mean, he's definitely in a league of his own in that respect.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So pursuing an academic career, which, as you've described, was a timely move and appropriate move, but you also rose to and continue to rise to the glittering heights of a political career. So how did you think about that, or did you think about it? And I'm hoping you won't tell me it was all just serendipity, because whilst there's always a degree of that and timely opportunity, etc., there has to have been some degree of thoughtfulness or intentionality.
So back to IRA. IRA sat me down and said, there are 3 ways to get to being the president of the American Society of Colorectal Surgeons. That's what he said. There are 3 ways. You can go through the American Board of Colorectal Surgery, you can go through the ASCRS committee work, or you can come at it from a research aspect. Well, I was already in the research aspect, but he actually got me involved with the board first. Rick Nelson was rewriting all of the exam questions that were the type X and the true false and the multi-choice A, B, C, D, E, D, E was
no
combination.
No better man than Rick to do that.
And so Rick recruited me, and I must have rewritten over 1,000 questions in about a 3-year period, which got me put on the exam committee of the board when I wasn't even a member of the board. So, and that was how the Board of Colorectal Surgery got going. Within the ASCRS, I realized that there were certain core things that we needed to have done so that we were maintaining a more academic presence. And so that was the CME committee. And Al Thorson and I spent time together on that CME committee trying to fix the self-assessment tests and the CARSAP and whatever. And then the research side of things, I can remember sitting in the Hilton Hotel in downtown Chicago with, who was it? Rick Nelson, and I'm blocking on his name, I'm sorry, who was the program director for Leahy Clinic when David Schetz was the head. He'd been there for years. He did all their colonoscopy. And John
Collar.
So John and Rick and I, and every now and then Abkarian would show up, and we had Garner from New York and Garnett from New York, and we would look at research projects. And that was the research side of things. And Pat Mazier was still in charge of the foundation, and there was very little funding available. And so I just said, look, I'm available and I'd love to do this stuff. So you
went from
get
there
involved, and it just goes.
I think I'm definitely going to select out that phrase as one of the great phrases that I think could probably last, which is every now and then Abkarian turned up. I think that's I mean, I think that covers a huge amount of things.
It does. Yeah, he had his finger in it all, for sure.
Exactly. So do you have another presidency in you?
I don't know. I was flabbergasted when I ended up getting on the board of regents for the college. That had never even crossed my mind. I'd watched Steve do a great job. He and I had talked about it, and I figured it was his turn. And so he went through, and I figured I'd be too old and way gone before it was ever considered. And
well, that may of course still be true,
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. But it's your career is it is what you've done in the past makes a difference in when people start considering.
No, I think that's true. And there's no question, despite me flippantly saying that, but there are people who have a whiteboard in their kitchen and have their life mapped out in very specifically, but I think there are equally people who just go with the flow, and if they contribute along the way, and if they're asked to do something, they do it. I think the one thing that does strike me is that the one piece of advice I give to people is that if you're asked to do something, then deliver on it,
right?
Because if you don't deliver on it, you'll be asked 3 or 4 or 5 times, but eventually you won't be asked.
Well, that's my talk with my junior faculty. Matt Much is the president of the Society of Colorectal Surgery. I sat him down and I said, if you take my job in St. Louis as the chair or the chief of colorectal, I expect you to be the president of the society before you're done. Simply because here's the background, here's what you have to do, here's the plan you need to follow. You show up, you produce, you contribute, and it becomes obvious.
So what advice would you give to a young Jim Fleshman, the young Jim Fleshman, not a young Jim Fleshman, but the young one, and say, you might want to consider doing this a little differently?
Well, I might have spent more time with the research side of things had I known now that the research is actually having a clinical impact beyond just evaluating new technology. Maybe I could have done more with the genetic side of things. I just never realized that that was going to be as important as it is now.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. In one of my interviews, I was talking to a surgeon who said that, surgery is fighting quite a rearguard action against medical oncology, for example, where there is an increasing belief that surgery will shortly be no longer required.
Right.
And whether that's true or not, or in whatever time frame it may or may not be true to an extent, there's no question that what an old buddy of mine used to refer to as the DNA navigators are gaining strength, and for good reason, and it's a good thing.
Well, there's I regret very little of my career. Let's put it that way. That is the genetics part of colorectal surgery was blown wide open when they discovered, chromosome 5, and that, and FAP showed, APC gene showed up, and Vogelstein and Fearon, and I got to know all those guys. I met them. We talked about things, and they were strictly geneticists or molecular biologists. And when we started talking about the clinical side of things, they didn't know where things were. And so I was always much more interested in the clinical side, and I didn't think that I would actually need to know everything that they know. Now I wish I did. So, when the genetics that I got at Washington University during my medical school was Mendelian.
Yeah.
The green and white pea, the spotted mouse.
Well, I can tell you that when I was in medical school in Trinity College, the entire immunology course was 2 afternoons.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
And that was pre discovery of monoclonal antibodies.
Right.
So there really was no immunology, etc.
Right.
So
we had a lot of stuff on virology because our division at WashU was heavily involved in figuring out where things were inserting into disease, and that was all they knew. So our immunology was a very short session as well.
So I chatted with Neil Hyman recently on this podcast, YouTube. And he was describing to me how he feels that the challenges of pursuing a career in surgery for the young graduating surgeon now are really quite real and tough. And he made a couple of important comments. One is that he tells these younger people that the world is a better place because of their existence, by a large margin. But he feels a need to help them because the pressure on them is much worse than when he or I or you began our career. Are you pessimistic, optimistic for the young surgeon starting?
I think they still have an opportunity for a great career. I think our residency program, we train 9 chief residents a year. They've switched from 10 years ago. We had very few who went into general surgery last year. When I first got here 10 years ago, every one of our 9 went into general surgery. So now they're finding fellowships and finding niches of where to work, and there's still a lot to do. I am not pessimistic about a career in general surgery, but it will not be the same as it was when you and I started, and it will not be the same 10 years from now when these guys are in the middle of their career. So
No, for sure.
they have to understand their role. I think a lot of them are actually um, better at saying no and being overcommitted than I ever was. And I think they can have a better life sooner
Yeah,
than you and I had.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
we were gone majority of the time, and we had to focus on making time for our family, spending time with our wife and kids, and and there was always a tug pull. Now I think they've got a priority of, this is a life, I want to live my life, and maybe they're not so worried about ending up as president of the
right.
society. Maybe they're more interested in doing a good thing for people and their family. So
No, I
I'm
think that's
giving,
right. I mean, I think it was the my personal view is that it was the very exceptional person 25 years ago that had those thoughts.
yeah,
And I mean, they were there, but they were very exceptional. Our blind ambition, if you like, whatever you want to call it, was commoner. Number one. Number two, I think having the conversation that you and I are having now would never have happened 25 years ago,
oh no,
because it would have been perceived as a weakness, a sign of weakness to even discuss things such as, stress and burnout. And, apart from mentioning a golf game every now and then, it never, and I don't think any of that's I think it's better that those conversations are had now. And there's no question that the millennial generation, whatever you want to call it, I would say have a better approach to life than we did. And it comes to different people at different ages, doesn't it?
yes. I
Uh,
mean, I asked my wife, Linda, the other day if I was present for my kids.
yeah,
Um, and she said yes, but they also understood that you couldn't be at everything.
yeah,
And so there were different expectations back then. And now I think people are feeling free to say, this is where my commitment ends, and I will do the very best I can for my patients, but I have someone else who can back me up, and I'm not going to hold on to everything.
yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I last year, as you may know, I took a trip across the country in an ancient Jag with my son. It was his 40th birthday, and that year or last year. And during our road trip, I had that same conversation with him, and because my wife would quite correctly say the answer to your two questions is that no, you were not there. And To a degree, I think the second answer would be the same. But I asked him that, and he said, "No, but don't worry about it, because it's the way it was then, and we didn't get damaged as a consequence of it. We understood, and it's just the reality. But I do think it's better that the world has improved in that respect."
Well, my son was guess he was a freshman in college at WashU, and he had come home at Christmas, and we were talking, and I said, "So have you decided on what your path is going to be through the university?" And he said, "I'm going to do business because I've watched you spend all this time. If I do that and I do it in business, I will be able to retire at the age of 40." And I said, "Oh, thanks. You've really hurt me." But you know what? He's 45, and he's done what he wants to do. And he is now part of an equity partnership, and really doesn't have to work any more than he really wants to. And that's, you make your choice.
Well, he'll need to work in order to keep you in the style to which you're accustomed, you
I,
know.
I agree.
You know,
Absolutely.
I mean that's
I will be relying on that for sure.
so when did and has retirement come into your mind, and if it has, thoughts of what are those thoughts, and how do you how is that thinking going? Are you going to be um, continuing until you're in your mid 80s? Are you going to do a Rob Madoff and say, I'm done here, I'm going to listen to the opera in Brooklyn? What's your spin on that?
So I was 55 years old in St. Louis. I was still the chief of colorectal, WashU. I had started a new program, an extension of our program at a smaller hospital called Barnes, West County.
Mm-hmm.
Had 100 beds and 10 operating rooms, and I was really the surgeon that was keeping it full. And my chief of general surgery, Will Chapman, came and talked to me and said, I think you're burning out. And I went, no, I'm not. And he goes, yes, you are. And that was when I was thinking about retiring, because I would come home telling Linda, I'm not working past 60. I've got to, I want to retire at 60. And she said, no, you're not retiring at 60 because I didn't marry you to entertain you. You're going to keep working somewhere. So find something to do. I don't care if you keep doing what you're doing now, but you're going to find something to do. So fast forward 10 years later, I'm in Dallas and I'm not operating as much as I was, but I'm still contributing at a level as a chair of a department and on this board, that board. And I enjoy doing that. And I haven't thought about retiring since I fixed the burnout issue. And fixing the burnout issue was realizing that you need something else and you need partners and you don't have to do it all. And you can be happy at doing something other than standing in an operating room 10 hours a day.
Yeah.
So I will probably work till I'm past 75. I'm 69 this summer. I will be 69. I have a feeling I may work up closer to 80. Just doing something because I enjoy it so much. Doesn't mean that I won't take days off in the middle of the week to go play golf, but I will definitely have something that I'm proud of that I'm doing till then.
Is there, do you have a bucket list? And if so,
Well,
what's there?
We like to travel. We love Europe. We haven't done much of the scenery sites in the United States. We've been to all the major cities, but I'm also a baseball fan. So my bucket list is going to as many ballparks in the States as I can get.
How many are you?
Probably 30 right now. So been to a bunch. You know,
Yeah.
you go to a meeting and there's a ballpark, you go to the ballpark, and that's kind of how to do it. And then, when your grandkids enter the equation, it changes your priorities. And so, okay, now it's no longer that I have to get to all the ballparks. It's just that I have to see my grandkids multiple times a year to make sure I keep up with them.
And indeed bring them to the ballparks.
Absolutely. That's
exactly.
something that's very, very important.
So how would you like to be remembered, and how do you think you will be remembered?
Wow. I've got a shelf full of chapters that I've written, a couple of books on it, and I've got a CV that's too thick. That's not how I want to be remembered. I want to be remembered as somebody that helped a lot of people get to where they want to be in their career. And I spend a lot of time talking to young surgeons, medical students, residents about leadership and finding your goals and learning that interacting with people is going to be much more important than whether you can tie a knot in 3 seconds or 2 seconds. I mean, it, things that I never really thought about when I was a kid. And I wish I had known those when I was a kid. And I wish I had known my communication style when I was a kid, because that would have impacted the way I dealt with people, because I thought everybody thought the same way I did.
Yeah.
So now I spend time figuring out where they're coming from so that I can relate to them in a way that makes them feel good. I got to tell you, that didn't cross my mind before the age of 55.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So
for sure. I mean, there's no question that if you want to call it wisdom, but whatever you call it, wisdom does come with age, and it takes some time. And I've every surgeon has intermittently stumbled across people that have other world hand skills that you just spot them immediately. They have a gift. But they're often not the most successful individuals, because and the corollary of that is that some of the more successful people were not necessarily the most naturally gifted surgeons, but the package was what went together, in terms of the passion, the skills. I mean, the unicorn triple or quadruple threat is exactly that. It's a unicorn. Not everybody is brilliant at everything, but it's the 6 inches between your ears that really makes the difference, I think, for a lot of people.
I just recently read 3 books written by a neurosurgeon named Henry Marsh. You
Oh yeah,
probably have heard of him.
yeah,
He starts out, and it's a very narcissistic
yeah,
book. It's about everything he had done, and then it's about, I found out something that I have to take care of myself. I'm not immortal, and I am human. And then the last part of it is paying back some of the stuff that, he had left a few people in his wake, so to speak. And I think as he matured, he went through some realization that he had missed some opportunities. He had tried to instill excellence in everyone he met, but he didn't really instill himself and help them achieve what they wanted in a way that they could look back on him fondly.
yeah.
I
No,
hope I hope to be able to do that some more in the next 10 years, and would hope that I am thinking less about myself and much more about the people that I'm working with, and I consider it working for them.
I think, Henry Marsh, became an acclaimed author, I think, with his late in life experiences
Right.
that informed him. And, one of my recently published conversations was with a very old friend of mine, not very old, but I've known him for many years, George Fielding, who's a legendary bariatric surgeon originally from Australia, but now in New York. And in the last 3 to 4 years, George has had a couple of stents put in, a pulmonary embolus. He had COVID 3 times, and he got multiple myeloma. And his emphasis on his life is in enjoying every day and being good to people and valuing his friends and family and doing what he wants to do, and not focusing on hate at all.
Yeah.
So I think it's very interesting. So in the last minute or so, Jim, I get to ask you a series of quick questions that you do not have any time to think about the answers for. There are no correct answers to these other than the fact that I know what the correct answers are. We'll have
Okay.
we'll go. I already know the first answer, but I'll ask you anyway. So baseball or football?
Baseball.
Coke or Pepsi?
Coke.
PC or Mac?
PC.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Beer or wine?
Wine.
Home or away?
Home.
Beatles or Stones?
Beatles.
I think you did okay.
Yeah. Well, that's Terry Hicks' influence.
Yeah, exactly. So listen, I want to thank you, Jim, really sincerely for spending some time. I've valued our friendship over many years and continue to do so. I hope that the millions who watch this podcast will find your thoughts and wisdom very valuable. I'm sure they will. I appreciate you taking the time and thank you for doing what you do and keep on doing what you do.
Well, thank you, John. It's been a pleasure, and my feelings are exactly the same way back at you.
Thank you, Jim.
Talk to you later.